The house was quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet. It wasn't a peaceful quiet or a sleepy Sunday morning quiet. It was a thick, heavy quiet that seemed to soak into the walls and the furniture. For the boy Leo, this quiet was his whole world. He hadn't spoken a single word in 2 years. He sat at the kitchen table, tracing his finger along a groove in the wood. His Aunt Mara moved around him, the sounds of her day the only soundtrack to his. The clink of a cup, the sigh of the refrigerator door, the low hum of the radio she kept on for company. She tried to talk to him, her voice always soft, always careful. "Scrambled eggs today, sweetheart? You like those?" Leo looked up, his eyes the color of a lake under clouds. He saw her smile, the little worried lines around her eyes that never seemed to go away. He gave a small, slow nod. That was his answer. A nod, a shake of the head, or nothing at all. His voice felt like a forgotten toy, locked in a box in a part of his mind he couldn't find the key to. The accident that took his parents was a blur of wrong sounding, noises and too bright lights in his memory. He remembered the crushing silence that came after. And in that silence, his own voice had just gone away. It wasn't that he chose not to speak. It was that the connection between the feeling inside and the words to put it into seemed to have been severed. Like a cut telephone line, Mara tried everything. She was his mother's sister, and she had taken him into her old, creaky house without a second thought. She loved him with a fierce, aching love, but his silence was a puzzle she couldn't solve. They saw a kind woman who played games with him, a man who gave him colorful blocks to arrange. They called it play therapy. Leo would participate, his movements precise and quiet. But the door to his words remained shut that afternoon. They were visiting a new doctor. Dr. Finch had an office that smelled like old books and lemon candy. He had a gentle face, and he didn't talk to Leo like he was a broken thing. He talked to Mara, with Leo sitting right there, listening. "It's called selective mutism, Mara, but in Leo's case, it's profoundly trauma-based," Dr. Finch explained, his hands resting calmly on his desk. "He's not refusing to speak. His brain, in its incredible effort to protect him from the overwhelming pain of that loss, has walled off the mechanism for speech. It's a fortress. The feelings are too big, so the words can't get out." Mara wiped a tear from her cheek. "But he understands everything. He's so smart. He follows instructions. He draws these amazing pictures. The words are in there. I know they are." "They are," Dr. Finch agreed. "They're trapped behind the wall. We've tried the usual keys, direct talk therapy, play therapy. They haven't worked. The key we need isn't a logical one. It's an emotional one. We need to find a side door, a way for him to express what's inside without needing to use the front gate of his voice." He looked over at Leo, who was looking at a model ship on a shelf. "Leo," Dr. Finch said, his voice calm and even. Leo turned his gaze to him. "Do you ever hear music in your head?" Leo's eyes flickered, just for a second. A tiny reaction. He gave a barely there shrug. Later, back in the quiet house, Mara watched Leo. He had pulled out his notebook, a black sketchbook with plain pages. He wasn't drawing cars or superheroes. He drew patterns. Complex, swirling lines that spiraled inward, tight knots of ink, and then sudden, flowing waves that burst across the page. They were maps of a feeling, a silent geography of his mind. The new music therapist, a young woman with a bright scarf, came the next week. She brought a small drum, a rain stick, a little xylophone. She tried to get Leo to make sounds to match a rhythm. Leo was polite. He would tap the drum once, softly. But his heart wasn't in it. It was another task, another expectation. He retreated further inside Dot as the therapist was packing up, frustrated, she noticed something. Leo wasn't looking at her or her instruments. He was staring, utterly focused, at the old clock on the mantelpiece. It was a grandfather clock that hadn't worked in years. But in the dead silence of the room, you could hear the faint, tiny settling of its old wood. Tick, creak. Listen to that? The therapist murmured, more to herself than to Mara. He's clinging to rhythm. Not the loud, forced rhythm I'm making, but a natural, internal one. She had a thought, a wild card. You know, she said to Mara, my uncle was a concert pianist. He always said music isn't about the notes you play, but the silence between them. The space where the feeling waits. She stood up. You have a piano, right? That old upright in the front room? Mara glanced at the closed door to the seldom used formal living room. That old thing? It was my mother's. It hasn't been tuned in maybe 20 years. It's just furniture now. Furniture that can make sound, the therapist said, a spark of idea in her eyes. It's worth a shot. I know a piano tuner. He's a bit of a character. Grumpy old man, really. But he has hands that can make a dead instrument sing. Maybe, just maybe, the process of bringing that piano back to life could be something for Leo to witness. A different kind of communication. Mara felt a familiar flicker of hope, quickly followed by the fear of another disappointment. She looked at Leo. He had overheard. He was no longer looking at the clock. He was looking at the closed door to the front room, his head tilted slightly, as if he could hear a ghost of a sound coming from behind it. Okay, Mara said, the word heavy with a last shred of hope. Call him. The piano tuner's name was Mr. Silas. He arrived 2 days later, his arrival announced by the grumble of an old truck and the slam of its door. He was a man in his late 60s, with a permanent frown and a tweed cap pulled low over eyes that looked like they'd seen too many out-of-tune strings. He carried a heavy toolbox that clanked with mysterious tools. Point me to the corpse, he said by way of greeting, his voice a low rumble. Mara, slightly taken aback, led him to the front room. The air was dusty and still. In the corner, under a yellowed lace cloth, stood the piano. It was big and dark, like a sleeping beast. Mr. Silas threw the cloth off with a practiced flick, sending a cloud of dust motes dancing in the sunbeam from the window. He ran a finger along the top, leaving a clean trail in the grime. Ah, he grunted. A relic. Probably sounds like a sack of nails. He opened the lid, revealing the yellowed keys. He pressed one. It made a loud, dull thunk that didn't fade. It just died. He winced. Told you. He set to work, opening the top of the piano to reveal the intricate forest of wires, hammers, and pins inside. He started pulling out tools, odd-looking wrenches, felt strips, a long strip of rubber with teeth on it. He worked with a grumpy efficiency, muttering to himself about rust and impossible angles. Leo had appeared in the doorway. He didn't come in. He just stood there, a small shadow. He watched Mr. Silas's every move, the way his strong, gnarled hands twisted the tuning wrench on a pin, the way he listened, his head cocked, his grumpy face transforming into one of deep, focused concentration. This wasn't a therapist trying to get inside his head. This was a man trying to fix a broken thing. Mr. Silas ignored him completely, which was perfect. Leo felt no pressure. For an hour, the only sounds were the ping of a tightened string, the soft tap of a hammer, and Mr. Silas's occasional sighs. Then he did something. He found a string that was close to true. He struck a tuning fork against his knee, a pure, shimmering a note humming in the air. He listened to the fork, then plucked the string, adjusting it until the two sounds became one, a single, clear-toned that seemed to clean the dusty air. Leo's breath hitched. It was a tiny, almost silent gasp, but in the quiet room, It was as loud as a shout. Mr. Silas froze. He didn't look up, but his hands stilled. He had heard it. He slowly turned his head and looked at the boy in the doorway for the first time. Their eyes met. Leo's were wide, unblinking, fixed on the inner workings of the piano. Without a word, Mr. Silas turned back. He moved his hands to the middle of the keyboard. He pressed down not one key, but three together with one strong, flat hand. A C major chord. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was full and rich, and it filled the entire room, vibrating in the floorboards, in the dust, in Leo's chest. The sound didn't just stop. It hung there, living, before slowly fading back into the quiet. Leo took one step into the room, then another. He walked slowly, as if in a trance, until he was standing right beside the piano bench, looking at the source of that wonderful, complex sound. Mr. Silas, for the first time, spoke directly to him. His voice wasn't gentle or coaxing. It was matter of fact, the voice of a craftsman stating a truth. "Hear that?" he said, nodding at the piano. "That's not just a note. That's a whole world." He shifted over on the long bench, just a few inches. An invitation, not a demand. Leo looked at the space, then at the old man's profile, then at the waiting keys. He climbed up and sat on the very edge of the bench, his small legs dangling. He stared at the black and white landscape in front of him. Hesitantly, he lifted one small finger. He reached out and pressed down the same white key that was at the heart of the chord Mr. Silas had played. Ping. A single, simple note. It was his note. He had made it. And in the resonance of that sound, in that dusty room with the grumpy old man, the heavy, hopeless quiet was broken for the very first time. The note hung in the air between them, clear and round. Leo pulled his finger back, as if the key had grown warm, his eyes wide. He looked from the piano to Mr. Silas and back again. The old tuner didn't smile. He just gave a slow, thoughtful nod, as if Leo had confirmed something he already suspected. "There it is," Mr. Silas murmured, more to the piano than to the boy. "The instrument knows." He went back to work, but everything was different now. Leo didn't retreat to the doorway. He stayed on the very edge of the bench, a silent observer. He watched the man's hands, the way they knew exactly where to go without looking. He saw the careful adjustment of a felt hammer, the gentle tightening of a copper coil. It wasn't random banging. It was precise, like a surgeon or a watchmaker. It was fixing. Mara peeked in, her heart doing a little jump at the sight of her nephew sitting so close to another person. She opened her mouth to say something, to offer tea, but Mr. Silas caught her eye and gave a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He didn't want the spell broken. She retreated, leaving the door slightly ajar. For another hour, the work continued. Mr. Silas would tune a string, then play a little sequence of notes a short, sad little walk down the scale, or a bright, quick triplet. He wasn't playing a song. He was testing listening. But to Leo, each little cluster was a sentence. The low, rumbling notes near the back felt like the thunder he sometimes heard in the distance. The high, tinkling ones at the far end were like the sound of the wind chime on the back porch. Finally, Mr. Silas worked his way to the middle of the keyboard again. He played a simple scale, C to C. It wasn't perfect, the piano was too old for that, but it was recognizable, a ladder of sound going up and down. He did it once more, slower. "Your turn," he said, his voice low. He pointed a thick, calloused finger at the far left key. The C, he pressed it. Doom, a deep, hollow sound. Leo looked at his own small hand. He stretched his fingers, then carefully placed his thumb on the same key. He pushed. The note was softer, but it was the same. He looked up at Mr. Silas. The old man pointed to the next key. Leo found it, played it. One by one, they went up the 8 notes of the scale. Leo's concentration was total. His brow was furrowed, his whole world narrowed to the task of matching his finger to the key the man indicated. When he hit the final C, a little harder than the rest, a flush of something pride, maybe, or just pure focus colored his cheeks. Mr. Silas didn't praise him. Instead, he did something else. He played the 8 notes again, but this time he put a feeling into it. The notes were legato, connected and smooth, like a slow sigh. He played it once more, staccato, the notes short and separated, like drops of rain on a tin roof. Leo watched, mesmerized. He understood. The same keys could say different things. Without a word, Mr. Silas closed the lid over the piano's strings. He started packing his tools, the clanks and thuds signaling the end of the visit. Leo slid off the bench, a sudden anxiety tightening his small frame. Was it over? Would the man with the sounds just leave? Mr. Silas stood, picking up his heavy toolbox. He looked down at Leo. "It's sick, this piano," he stated. "Can't fix it in one day. It's forgotten how to be itself. Needs reminding. A little at a time." He paused, his eyes boring into Leo's. "I'll be back next week. Same day. You can watch. If you want." He gave a final nod, then walked out, leaving Mara to pay him at the front door. Leo stood alone in the quiet room. But the quiet was different now. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. He could still feel the vibration of the notes in the wood of the floor, in his own bones. He climbed back onto the bench and opened the lid, exposing the keys. He pressed the low C doom. He pressed the high C ting. 2 different worlds. He sat there for a long time, just listening to the sounds fade into the house. The week that followed was the longest of Leo's young life. The silent film of his days now had a soundtrack itching in his mind. He heard the low notes when his aunt chopped vegetables on the cutting board. He heard the high notes in the chirp of the sparrows outside his window. He spent more time in the front room, which was no longer a dusty museum, but a place of possibility. He opened his notebook and tried to draw the sounds. He drew a dark, heavy spiral for the low C. He drew a light, jagged star for the high one. Mara noticed the change. It wasn't that he spoke. It was that he was here, more than he had been in 2 years. His eyes were present, tracking things. He helped set the table without being asked, just so he could hear the clatter of the plates, a percussive sound. She didn't push. She just watched, her hope a fragile, growing thing. When the day finally came, Leo was dressed before breakfast. He sat by the front window, watching for the grumble of the old truck. When it came, he didn't run to the door. He walked with a deliberate speed to the front room and sat on the bench, waiting. Mr. Rice. Silas came in, same cap, same frown. He gave Leo a glance. "You're here," he said, as if he'd expected him not to be. He got to work. This session was different. Now Mr. Silas started to talk. Not in a sweet, explaining voice, but in a gruff, matter-of-fact monologue directed at the piano's insides. "See this here?" he said, pointing to a hammer. "Lazy? Hits the string and just lays there. Muffles the sound. Got to make it bounce." He made a small adjustment with his tool. He played the note. It was brighter, clearer. There, got its energy back. Leo leaned in, his nose almost touching the iron frame. Mr. Silas moved to another section. "This string's lonely, see? It's supposed to have a friend, 2 more just like it, to make the sound fat and rich. But its friends are gone, rusted through. So it sounds thin, whiny." He plucked it. It made a weak nasal sound. He reached into his box and pulled out a new string, coiled like a silver snake. He showed Leo how to thread it, how to wind it. It took a long time. When he finally tuned it and played it with its two new friends, the chord was so full and beautiful it made the window pane buzz. Leo let out a soft breath, a silent, "Oh." Mr. Silas looked at him. "That's better, isn't it?" "Fixed the family." The word landed in Leo's chest. Family, a word that felt like a bruise. He looked at the trio of strings, now vibrating together, and something deep inside him, something frozen, gave a tiny, almost painful crack dot near the end of the visit. Mr. Silas focused on a section in the middle. He tuned a few notes, then played a simple 5-note pattern. It was a sad little tune, falling down and then trying to climb back up. He played it again. "This," he said, his voice dropping, losing its grumpiness for a moment, "is a rainy Tuesday, when you've got nothing to do and the world feels gray." He moved his hands and played another pattern, using the same notes but in a different order, with a bouncy rhythm. "And this," he said, "is when the sun breaks through right after. Same rain, different feeling." He stood up, wiping his hands on a cloth. "The piano's just a box of wires and wood, boy. The feeling, that comes from here." He tapped his own chest, right over his heart. Then, almost awkwardly, he pointed a finger at Leo's chest. "And from here." He packed his tools. "More work next week." "It's remembering." Bit by bit. After he left, Leo didn't play the Rainy Tuesday tune. He was too afraid he'd get it wrong, that he'd break the fragile magic of it. Instead, he played the single notes. He found the 3 strings that were now a family and played them together, holding the pedal down to let the sound swell. He played the bright, bouncy hammer note. He played the deep, lonely thunder note. That night, as Mara washed the dishes, a sound floated from the front room. It wasn't a song. It was a pattern. A deep note, followed by 3 higher ones, then the deep note again, over and over. A conversation between the storm and the rain. She turned off the water and stood perfectly still, a soapy plate in her hand. Tears welled up in her eyes, but for the first time in 2 years, they weren't tears of sadness or frustration. They were tears of awe. He was speaking, not with words, but with something older, something truer. The piano was no longer just furniture. It had become his voice. And in the quiet house, for the first time since he'd arrived, Leo was finally beginning to say hello. The rhythm from the front room became a part of the house. Mara found herself listening for it, the way she used to listen for the sound of his voice. It wasn't always pretty. Sometimes it was just 2 notes, hit over and over, hard and angry. Other times it was a slow, wandering search up the keys that never seemed to find what it was looking for. But it was communication. It was a signal sent out from his silent island. Mr. Silas came back the next week and the week after that. His visits settled into a routine. He would arrive with his toolbox, give a curt nod, and get to work. Leo was always there, waiting on the bench. The old man stopped telling him he could watch. It was simply understood. Their relationship lived in the language of the piano. Mr. Silas would point to a part inside the belly of the instrument. "Dampers," he'd grunt. "They're the manners of the piano. They stop the strings from being rude and all talking at once." He showed Leo how the right pedal lifted them all, letting every note sing together until it faded. Leo would listen, then press the pedal and play a cluster of notes, listening to the messy, beautiful soup of sound. One afternoon, Mr. Silas was replacing a worn-out piece of felt. He spoke as he worked, his eyes on his hands. "My teacher, a long time ago, he was a tough old bird. He never talked about happy or sad. He talked about weather. He plinked a key. That's a sunny day on a cold lake. Bright, but with a chill underneath. He played a different chord, one that sounded unresolved and longing. That's the sky just before snow. The quiet, the waiting. Leo absorbed it all. He started to hear the world in this new way. The slam of the screen door wasn't just a noise. It was a loud, abrupt staccato chord. The kettle whistling was a sharp, high note that climbed and held. He began to experiment. He tried to play the sound of the dog barking next door. It came out as a short, rhythmic, ruff in the middle register. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He tried to play the squeak of the floorboard by his bed. It was harder, a high, thin sound he had to hunt for. He brought his notebook to the piano. Mara, peeking in, saw him look from a page of his swirling, intricate drawings to the keys, his fingers trying to find a sound that matched the shape on the paper. He was translating "One Tuesday," a rainy Tuesday, just like the one Mr. Silas had described. Something changed. The old tuner had finished his work and was just sitting on the bench, not playing anything, just staring at the keys. His usual gruffness was gone, replaced by a deep tiredness. Leo sat beside him, sensing the shift. After a long silence, Mr. Silas spoke, his voice softer than Leo had ever heard it. "It used to be my voice, too, this thing." He held up his hands. They were strong, but the knuckles were swollen, the fingers slightly crooked. Not for talking, for saying the things that don't fit into words. The big things, the joy that feels like you're flying, the sadness that's too heavy to carry. He flexed his fingers slowly, with some difficulty. Then these broke. Not all at once, slowly. They said I'd never play a concert again. And they were right. He let his hands fall into his lap. So now I just fix them for other people. I listen to other people's music. It's a good job. But sometimes the silence in between the notes, it's very loud. He wasn't talking to a child anymore. He was just talking, confessing to the quiet room. Leo looked from the man's sad, worn face to his own small hands resting on his knees. He understood loud silence, Mr. File. Silas took a deep breath, shook his head as if clearing water from his ears, and stood up. Enough of that. Tuning's done. Don't let the dampers stick. And he left a little quicker than usual. Leo stayed. The rain tapped against the window. He thought about the man's broken hands, about the music that was trapped inside them. He thought about his own trapped words. He looked at the keys. He remembered the first chord Mr. Silas had played, the one that had felt like a whole world. Slowly, carefully, he placed his hands on the keys. He didn't think about notes. He thought about the gray sky. He played a low, rumbling cluster. He thought about Mr. Silas's tired eyes. He found a series of notes that walked slowly, heavily, down the scale. He thought about the feeling of being fixed, bit by bit, like the piano. He played a single, clear, high note and held it, letting it shine through the gloom. He was playing for 10 minutes. It wasn't a song anyone would know. It was a feeling. It was the rainy Tuesday, the old man's sadness, and a little thread of that clear, high hope, all mixed together. He was talking back. He didn't know Mara was standing in the hallway, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming silently down her face. She heard it all. She heard her nephew's heart, wide open and singing through his fingers. The next time Mr. Silas came, Leo was bursting with a silent urgency. As soon as the old man had tuned the first few notes, Leo tugged gently on his sleeve. He pointed to the piano, then to his own chest, then made a waving motion with his hand, like something flowing out. "You made something?" Mr. Silas guessed. Leo nodded vigorously. He pushed his notebook across the bench. On a new page, he had tried to draw music. It was a series of waves and dots and lines, a chaotic but beautiful map. No one else could read it, but it was his score. He positioned his hands over the keys. He took a deep breath, and he played Dot. It was the Rainy Tuesday piece. He played it all the way through, from the first low rumble to the final fading high note. His playing was hesitant in places, his rhythm a little unsteady, but the emotion was pure and undiluted. It was a gift, an understanding, a way of saying, I hear your loud silence too. When the last sound vanished, the room felt charged, like the air after a lightning strike. Leo kept his head down, suddenly shy. He couldn't look at the old man. Mr. Silas didn't say anything for a long time. The only sound was the soft tick of the clock they had fixed in the corner. Then a rough, choked sound came from him. Leo glanced up. Tears were cutting clean tracks through the dust on Mr. Silas's cheeks. He wasn't sobbing. He was just overflowing. He looked at Leo, and for the first time, his face wasn't grumpy or distant or sad. It was wide open with awe. Boy, he whispered, his voice cracking. You didn't just play the notes. You played the space between them. He reached out one of his big, broken hands and placed it gently on top of Leo's head, leaving it there for a moment in a wordless blessing. Then he stood, cleared his throat loudly, and busied himself with his toolbox, blinking hard. Right, he said, his gruffness returning, but it was softer now, a comfortable coat. That's enough for today. You keep working on that. That's a real thing. He left without another word. Leo sat in the vibrating quiet, his scalp still warm where the hand had rested. He looked at the keys. He had done it. He had taken a feeling from inside his quiet chest and sent it out into the world. And someone had not only heard it, they had understood it perfectly. He was no longer just learning the language of the piano. He was writing poetry in it. And for the first time in 2 years, the silence inside him didn't feel like a prison. It felt like the quiet hum of a string, waiting for the right touch to make it sing. Winter turned to spring. The world outside the window changed from gray to a soft green, and the light in the front room grew warmer and longer. Inside, Leo's world was changing too. The piano was no longer a project or a curiosity. It was his confidant, his diary, his shout, and his whisper. After the Rainy Tuesday piece, something shifted between Leo and Mr. Silas. The old tuner still came every week, but the work on the piano was mostly done. It would never be a concert grand, but it had a voice again, a sweet, slightly raspy, honest voice. Now, their sessions became lessons of a different kind. Mr. Silas would sit beside Leo on the bench, not as a repairman, but as a guide. He didn't teach scales from a book. He taught the geography of feeling. Show me the sound of something hiding. Mr. Silas would say one day. Leo would think, his fingers hovering. Then he'd play a series of very soft, high notes, tucking them into the upper registers, almost like a secret. Good, Mr. Silas would grunt. Now, the sound of finding it. Leo would play a strong, clear chord in the middle, a sound of surprise, and light. Another day, the sound of an old memory. Not sad, not happy, just there. This was harder. Leo played a simple melody with his right hand, but with his left, he held down the soft pedal, making the notes blurry and distant, like a face seen through old glass. Mr. Silas just nodded, a deep satisfaction in his eyes. Leo's notebook transformed. The swirling abstract patterns began to organize. He started drawing straight lines across the pages and putting his swirls and dots on and between them. He was inventing his own musical notation, mapping the landscapes in his head. He'd point to a jagged star shape on a high line, then play a sharp, bright note. He'd point to a deep, inky pool low on the page, and play a rumbling cluster, Mr. Silas watched this secret language grow, and he began to learn it. He'd point to a symbol and ask, "This one? What's this?" Leo would play it for him, but it was during one of these sessions that Mr. Silas had the idea. Leo had just finished playing a new composition, a short piece that started with a frantic, "Running up the keys passage, the squirrel in the yard." He later explained in his notebook with a drawing that ended in a single, sustained, peaceful note, the squirrel stopping. Safe in the tree. That's not just playing anymore. "Leo," Mr. Silas said, his voice serious, "that's composing. That's making something from nothing but what's inside you." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the boy's small, serious face. "My old friend," he began cautiously, "he runs a thing. For the city. A youth orchestra. They have a showcase every year. They look for unusual talent. Not just kids who can play fast." Leo's head snapped up, his eyes wide with instant alarm. He shook his head violently, his whole body tensing. The outside world, with its crowds and expectations, was the one place his piano couldn't protect him. "I know," Mr. Silas said, holding up a hand. "I'm not saying you go on stage. I'm saying, what if they just heard it? What if someone else, who knows music like I know old pianos, just listened?" Later that evening, Mr. Silas talked to Mara in the kitchen. He was uncharacteristically gentle. "The music he's making in there, Mara, it's not child's play. It's a soul talking. It deserves a witness. More than just me and these walls." Mara wrung her hands. "But the pressure. If he thinks people are judging him?" "No pressure," Mr. Silas insisted. "We don't even tell him when it happens. I'll record him one day when he's just playing for himself. I'll send it to my friend. That's all. If nothing comes of it, he never needs to know. But if something does, it could be a door out of this quiet." Mara looked toward the front room, where a hesitant, beautiful melody was unfolding. It was the sound of her nephew, happy. She took a deep breath. Okay, just the recording. No promises to him. The plan was set. The following week, after a lesson, Mr. Silas said, "Play the one about the squirrel. I want to remember how you did that ending." Obligingly, Leo played his little piece. He didn't see the small, old digital recorder Mr. Silas had placed on top of the piano, its little red light glowing softly. A few days later, Mr. Silas visited his friend, a man who had once conducted great symphonies and now poured his energy into finding the next generation of musicians. He was a tall, elegant man with kind eyes. In his quiet office, Mr. Silas placed the recorder on the desk. "I don't want favors, Elias," Mr. Silas said. "Just listen. Tell me what you hear." The conductor pressed play. The room filled with the tinny sound from the small speaker. The skittering, playful run, the perfect pause, the single resolving note. It was less than a minute long. When it finished, the conductor's eyebrows were raised. Charming. Nice musicality for a child. The timing on that final pause is instinctive. "Who is he?" "Just listen to this one," Mr. Silas said, skipping the recorder to another file. This was the piece Leo called, in his mind, "The House at Night." It was the sounds of the settling house, the creak on the stair, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sigh of a car woven into a strange, haunting lullaby. It was subtly complex, shifting, and mysterious. The conductor sat forward, his professional detachment falling away. He closed his eyes. When it ended, he looked at Mr. Silas. "This is different. This is compositional thinking. It's atmospheric. It's narrative." "How old?" 10, Mr. Silas said. "Training?" "Me, for a few months. Before that, nothing." The conductor stared. "That's impossible." His life hasn't been possible, Mr. Silas said simply. The music comes from what's left after everything else was taken away. He told him then in few words about the accident, the silence, the fortress the boy lived in. There was a long silence. The conductor played the House at Night piece again. He doesn't speak. Not a word in 2 years. The piano? It's his only voice. The conductor nodded slowly, a decision forming in his eyes. There's an audition for the soloist spotlight in the spring showcase. It's competitive. Dozens of prodigies playing Chopin and Mozart flawlessly. He tapped the recorder. This isn't flawless, but it might be more important. I want to hear him live, in person. When Mr. Silas brought the news to Mara, she panicked. An audition? On a stage? He'll freeze. It will set him back years. He doesn't have to see the stage, Mr. Silas argued. We can go early. He can play just for your friend Elias in an empty hall. No audience. Just one man listening. Like I listen. If he gets scared, we leave. No harm done. It took a week of careful, silent persuasion. Mr. Silas didn't ask Leo directly. He talked to the piano while Leo was there. Some rooms, he mused, have a different sound. Big spaces. The notes live longer in the air. They dance around before they come back to you. He described the hall not as a place of judgment, but as a giant, beautiful instrument itself. Slowly, Leo's curiosity overpowered his fear. The idea of hearing his notes dance in a big space was a powerful lure. One day, he brought his notebook to Mara. On a clean page, he had drawn a simple picture, a small stick figure at a piano, and in front of it, just one larger stick figure sitting and listening. A question mark dot her eyes filled. He was asking, just one man? She whispered. In a big, empty room? Leo nodded dot double quotes, and if you don't like it, we turn around and come home? He nodded again. More firmly dot Mara looked at Mr. Silas, who gave a single solemn nod. Just one man. In an empty room. And so it was agreed. The audition was set for a Saturday morning, 2 weeks away. Leo didn't know it was an audition. He thought it was a field trip to hear his piano's voice in a new house. He began to prepare in his own way. He started a new piece in his notebook. This one was more ambitious than the others. It had storms and silences, lonely walks, and sudden bursts of something like sunlight. He was trying to draw and then to play not just a feeling or a moment, but a story. His story. He worked on it every day, his small body hunched in concentration. The fortress of his silence had found a drawbridge, and he was building it, note by careful note, reaching out toward a world he hadn't dared face in years. He wasn't playing for a prize or a spot in a show. He was playing for the chance to finally, fully introduce himself. The morning of the audition was a gray one, a soft blanket of clouds hanging low. Leo was dressed in a clean sweater that felt a bit too tight around his neck. He carried his notebook, clutched to his chest like a shield. Mara fussed with his hair, her hands trembling slightly. Mr. Silas waited by the door, his usual gruffness replaced by a solid, calm presence. He carried Leo's piano bench in one hand. The boy needed his own familiar island to sit on. The concert hall was on the other side of town, a big old building of stone that looked like a castle. They went in through a side door, into a backstage world of ropes and dark curtains and strange, echoing emptiness. Leo's eyes were huge, taking in the towering shadows. The air smelled of dust and old wood. Mr. Silas led them through a heavy door and out onto the stage. Leo stopped dead. It wasn't an empty room. It was a cavern, a vast, velvet-draped canyon that seemed to swallow sound and light. Rows and rows of red seats stretched back into a dizzying darkness. A single grand piano stood in a pool of light in the very center, looking small and lonely. It was nothing like the cozy, dusty front room. Leo took a step back, pressing into Meryl's side. This was a mistake. The fortress walls inside him slammed up, higher and thicker than ever. He shook his head, a frantic back-and-forth motion. No. From the shadows of the front row, a figure stood up. It was the conductor, Elias. He was tall and lean, and he walked toward the stage with a slow, unhurried grace. He didn't climb up. He just stood near the edge, looking up at Leo with kind, thoughtful eyes. "Leo," he said, his voice warm and resonant, filling the space easily. "This must feel very big." "It's just a big box for sound. That's all. Mr. Silas tells me you've been building a new piece." "A story?" Leo stared, frozen. Mr. Silas, standing by the familiar bench he'd placed in the light, spoke next. His voice was quiet, meant only for the stage. "You don't have to play the story, Leo. You can just play the weather. Just play the first part. The storm. That's all." But Leo felt the notebook in his hands. He had drawn the whole map, the storm, the lonely walk, the fragile light, the quiet peace at the end. To play only one part felt like telling a lie. It felt like speaking only the first word of a sentence, and then closing his mouth. He looked out at the sea of red seats, at the single man waiting in the dark. He thought of his piano at home, of the way the sound hugged the walls. Here, the sound would have to travel. It would have to be brave enough to fly out into all that nothingness and find its way back. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Mara. She knelt beside him, her eyes level with his. She didn't say, "It's okay," or "You can do it." She just looked at him, and in her eyes he saw everything: the car, the hospital, the silent years, the first piano chord, the rainy Tuesday piece. She gave the smallest smile, a barely there, lifting at the corners of her mouth, and squeezed his shoulder. It was enough. He walked, on legs that felt like wood, to the bench. He sat. The grand piano's keys were longer, whiter, more imposing. He opened his notebook to the last page, to his swirling, inky map. He placed his fingers on the cool keys. And then he forgot. He forgot the vast hall. He forgot the man watching. He forgot the audition. The fear didn't leave, but it became a part of the music. He started with the storm, not Mr. Silas's little rainy Tuesday, but the storm, the one from his memory. It was a crashing, discordant blast of sound from the low end, his left hand hammering a dark, rolling chaos. It was the squeal of brakes, the shatter of glass, the world turning upside down. Then it fractured into a high, sharp, desperate note that repeated and repeated like a heartbeat racing, like a siren. The silence after the crash. This was the new, terrible quiet of his old life. It was a single, wandering melody with his right hand, lost and alone, searching through empty spaces on the keyboard, finding no resolution. He played for 5 minutes. He played the heavy, dragging feeling of days in the quiet house. He played the first glimpse at the piano, a single questioning note that echoed like a footstep in an empty hall. He played Mr. Silas's lessons, clusters of sound that were questions, and then answers in clear, simple chords. He played the joy of discovery, a skipping, bright run up the keys that stumbled happily. He wove in the sad, kind eyes of the old tuner, and the warm, worried eyes of his aunt. He built it all, layer by layer, the darkness and the light, tangled together, until he reached the end of his map. The music softened, grew simpler. It wasn't a happy ending. It was a peaceful one. A single, unwavering melody in the middle register, supported by a gentle, rocking bass. It was the sound of sitting on a familiar bench, in a pool of light, with the dust dancing and knowing, for the first time, that you are not alone, even in your silence. The final chord was a major one, but it was played so softly it was almost a breath. He lifted his fingers. The sound didn't just fade. It expanded. It filled the huge, hungry space of the hall, swirling up into the darkness, bouncing off the balconies, and finally, slowly, dissolving into an absolute. Profound quiet. Leo sat very still, his head bowed, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had poured everything out. He felt empty and light and terrified. From the darkness, there was a sound. One person clapping. Not a wild applause, but a slow, solid, respectful clap. Clap, clap, clap. It was the conductor, Elias. He walked into the light at the edge of the stage, his face serious. He looked at Leo for a long moment, then at Mara and Mr. Silas, who were holding on to each other's arms, tears on both their faces. He climbed the steps onto the stage. He didn't go to Leo. He went to the piano. He reached out and gently closed the lid over the keys, a gesture of deep respect. Like closing the cover of a sacred book. Then he walked over and crouched down in front of the bench. So he was looking up at Leo. His own eyes were shiny. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for telling us your story. That was not an audition. That was a gift." He paused, choosing his words with immense care. "In the showcase, we give a first prize. The best technique, the most perfect performance. But we also give a special award, just once in a while. It's for the performance that changes the air in the room. That reminds us why we make music in the first place." He stood up. "I would be honored if you would come back in 2 weeks and play that for people. Not in an empty hall. For a full one. To give them that gift." Leo's breath caught. A full hall. People. The fear rushed back, cold and immediate. He started to shake his head, but then Mr. Silas was there, his hand on Leo's back. "Same bench," the old man rumbled softly. "Same piano. Same story. Just more witnesses. The notes don't change. The story doesn't change. You just let a few more people hear it." Leo looked at Mara. She was nodding, her hand over her mouth, her eyes saying, "Only if you want to." He looked down at his notebook, at the map of his journey from the storm to the peace. He had already crossed the biggest ocean. Maybe he could cross this smaller sea. He looked back at the conductor and gave one small, slow nod. The night of the showcase arrived. He did not win first prize. A girl who played a dizzyingly difficult violin concerto won, and she deserved it. Leo sat between Mara and Mr. Silas in the audience, his stomach in knots. When the conductor walked back onto the stage at the end, he spoke about the purpose of music. "And so," he said, "we present a special award for most profound artistic expression. Please welcome back to the stage a young composer named Leo." The applause was polite, curious. Leo walked out, under the bright lights, to his own bench and the giant piano. He saw a sea of faces, a blur of expectant eyes. The panic rose, a metallic taste in his mouth. His hands felt numb. He couldn't remember the first note. He couldn't breathe. He looked into the wings, into the darkness. There he saw the outline of Mr. Silas, standing in the shadows. The old man didn't smile, or give a thumbs up. He simply placed his broad, broken hand flat over his own heart. Then he pointed that same hand, firmly, at Leo. Leo understood. The story wasn't out there. It was in here. He closed his eyes. When he played, he didn't play for the crowd. He played for the storm, for the quiet house, for the dusty front room, for the man who fixed broken things. He told his story again. When he finished, the silence was different than in the audition. It was a held breath. And then The hall erupted. People stood, not just clapping, but with a kind of awe on their faces. They had not just heard a performance. They had been spoken to. Afterward, as people milled about, the conductor found them. He handed Leo a small, simple trophy, but his attention was on the boy's face. "That was even more courageous than the first time," he said. "You have a rare voice, Leo." A woman with a notepad, a reporter, squeezed through. She smiled warmly at Leo. "That was breathtaking, young man," she said. "What is the piece called?" Leo was holding his trophy, feeling the weight of it, the strangeness of the night. He looked up at her friendly face. He opened his mouth. For 2 years, no words had come. Just music. The air felt tight in his throat. Mara held her breath. Mr. Silas went very still. Leo's lips moved, soundless at first. Then, a rough, soft, unused whisper, like the first creak of an old door opening, found its way out. "Home," he said. The word hung in the air, clear as a single perfect note. It wasn't just the name of the piece. It was an answer, a statement, a return. He had found his way back, not to a place, but to himself. And he had brought